Hello, fellow rebel capitalists. Hope you're well. Just ran across a story from CNBC about student loan forgiveness. We haven't talked about this for a while, but it went over some interesting data points that I think we all need to consider. First of all, I think most of you are on the same page here. I think college is just a complete scam. I mean, it's an utter scam that has been propped up by the government, and the government giving these cheap loans to kids to go to a 4-year university. They don't learn much, and at the end, they're just saddled with debt. I think the big scam is that we as society have been pushing the kids to do this because when they're 15, 16, 17 years old, they don't know any better. They're going to do what their parents tell them to do. And the parents listen to the government. And the government comes out with all these BS statistics saying that there's some sort of causal effect between kids going to college and actually making money when they get out. And I think that's utter nonsense. I think that is the number one statistical error of confusing correlation for causation, and that I don't think it has anything to do with the kids going to college. I think it's the fact that the kids that go to college were brought up by families who most likely had a significant amount of discipline with their kids. And I'm not saying that punish them, but discipline in the sense they made them do their homework and they kept a schedule, and that therefore the kids were hardworking, and therefore the fact that they went to college didn't really make them successful in life. The fact that they learned all these things in the home, most of them in a nuclear family, those are the skills that prompted them to go to college, and those are the skills that got them a good job afterward. It wasn't really all about the college, and I think that's kind of a scam that's perpetrated by the media, and it's just intellectual dishonesty. It's intellectual laziness is really what it is, because they'll sit there and they'll look at the average salary for someone who graduated from college and the average salary for someone who didn't, and then they'll assume that's the only variable involved, and it's very weak thinking. So, but then what we do is we tell these kids, oh, yeah, you got to go to college, and then you got to borrow all this money. So when you get out, you can take whatever you want, just follow your passion, blah, blah, blah. And then, oh, yeah, you followed your passion into studying whatever it is, English or something. And when you get out, you got $100,000 in debt, and there's just no way you can pay that back. In fact, in this article, I read that the average student loan payment is $400 a month. I didn't know it was that much. And I mean, that is a significant amount of money when you're thinking about someone that's in their 20s or maybe even in their early 30s, and they're making $20, $30 an hour. And I mean, $50,000 a year. I mean, that's a significant amount of money every single month. We're talking about what, 5 grand a year? That's a really big deal. And so then we, push all these kids into college. They follow their passion. And then when they get out, that passion can't put food on the table, and that passion can't pay back the student loan debt. Now, for me, it's a mixed bag, because I'm also all about personal responsibility and personal accountability. So I don't think it's fair that the kids now say, "Oh well, I did this. Now I have this big debt, and now the government needs to solve all my problems," because I think that sets up even more moral hazard than we have today. But I want to make sure everyone's clear here. The catalyst for this problem is really the government, because even if we had this societal push towards college, which was misplaced, the government has to come in and subsidize these loans. And because the government guarantees these loans, which a bank would never give out, then what happens is all of the colleges take the money, and what happens to tuition? It's the same thing that happened in the housing market in the 2000s. And that's that you give away all this money, and it's easy loans. Easy loans. All I have to do is fog a mirror to get a loans. What happens to the price of housing? It skyrockets. It's the exact same thing with college tuition. We basically have a housing bubble in college tuition. It's a student debt loan bubble, we'll call it. But it's all on the government's or most of it's on the government's balance sheet. So we don't think that it carries any systemic risk. which it might not to the government, but it carries a lot of systemic risk to the students themselves, because college student loan debt is the only debt that you can't get rid of in bankruptcy. So, and most people think that's taxes as well, but it's not. There's certain, and I'm not a tax lawyer, but just FYI, there are certain taxes that are um, that you can extinguish via bankruptcy, but student loan debt you can't. So that's even more powerful than taxes, and that's what kids are dealing with right now. So that's why I think this whole college, you got to go to college to get a good job. I mean, it's a huge scam, and the kids they just don't have enough life experience to know the difference. I mean, one great example I would give you is just Josh. We talked about him in an earlier video. He's on right now. Josh is 18, 19 years old, and I haven't talked to him about it, but I don't think he plans on going to college. Instead, he wants to come and start working. He's obviously very enthusiastic about macroeconomics. So let's just say he comes and he works for me for Rebel Capitalist for the next 4 years in doing these types of economic videos. Is he going to have a better education here, or is he going to have more opportunity? Is he going to have a better skill set, or going to a 4-year college where he's going to learn economics from Isabella? That was the gal that was arguing for price controls, who was an assistant professor of economics at a university in Boston, which oddly enough, I think is where Josh is from. So you see where I'm going with this. And the kids just don't have that life experience to know the difference. So let's go to this story where, and let's get some of these facts, because again, I didn't realize the numbers were this staggering. And then let's try to think through what would happen to the economy, what would happen to the stock market, what would happen to the housing market if Biden were to come out and just wipe the slate clean. And let's also think through the probability of that actually coming to fruition. So we've got student loan payments
You need
keep
to
getting
share the screen.
delayed. Okay, share the screen. There we go. I always forget to do that. Okay. So student loan payments keep getting delayed. Will the debt ever be forgiven? Key points. The payment pause for student loan borrowers has been extended 5 times. Wow, I didn't know that. Wow. Okay. So it's been extended 5 times during the cerveza sickness. Advocates say it's time for deep relief in the form of, boy, I didn't realize that. So let's really pay attention to this. So if it's gone on so long, what's going to happen is the students that are, or the former students that are paying this back, they're going to get acclimated to not having that payment. So it's going to be I mean, if this were to go on for maybe a month or two where they didn't have to make a payment, that's one thing. But it's gone on almost 2 years where they don't have to make a payment. I mean, they have completely adjusted their lifestyle to having this additional purchasing power. And now this makes a lot more sense when I think about, whenever I went to Puerto Rico as an example, and I see all of these young kids down there spending money here, and I'm like, where on earth are these kids getting this money? I mean, when I was that age, I didn't have a pot to piss in. I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. I'm like, where are they getting all this money? And now, with the PPP and maybe not that, but with the STEMI checks, not having to pay their rent and not having to pay their student loan. I mean, this is all making a lot more sense. And when we sit there and talk about the STEMI checks, like we've done on this channel many times, and I've fallen prey to this myself, where you just get focused on the STEMI checks and you say, well, if they're not getting STEMI checks, how do they continue to have this additional purchasing power that they didn't have in 2019? And then you say, well, there's the child tax credit. Okay, well, that explains some of it. But then you say, okay, well, then there's housing. Okay, that explains some. But now when you combine all of these things together on top of the fact that they haven't had to pay their student loan in 2 years, now this is making a lot more sense. When Scott Hines heard that Biden administration was giving student loan borrowers another 3 months before they'll have to start making their payment, he had mixed feelings. See, and this is where I don't have much sympathy for Scott. Sorry, Scott. On one hand, the freelance photographer in Brooklyn. So you see, what they'll do later on in the article is they'll say, well, you know, Biden's argument is, well, we can't forgive student loan debt like I promised. And here's another thing that he lied about, by the way. And it's not just Biden, it's all politicians. But again, if he's coming out and telling you that it's safe to inject a foreign substance into the body of your 5-year-old, are you really going to believe that guy after he's lied to you about pretty much everything? He's lied to you about the mandates. He's lied to you about the additional doses, we'll call them. He's lied to you about student loan debt. He's lied about all this stuff. But I don't want to get off on that tangent there. But they go on to say that the people who are pushing back, even in the Democratic Party, are saying, well, we shouldn't forgive student loan debt because everyone that has a student loan is making millions of dollars because they're all educated. And we know that just because you go to college means that you're going to make a ton of money. You know, they're making that error of the confusing correlation and causation. So on one hand, the freelance guy in New York. So by the way, so think about this. You've got student loan debt. You've got a payment every single month. And then how good of an idea is it to go up to Brooklyn and be a freelance photographer? I mean, I get it. You're following your passion, but why the hell did you go to college if you want to become a freelance photographer? I mean, again, it's tough for me to have a lot of sympathy here for Scott. But he says he doesn't know what the future is going to lead because of the scariant will impact his work. And I want to point out, Scott, it's not the scariant that's impacting your work. It's the government's response to the scariant. And so getting a little more time is a relief. Okay, how much time do you need? I mean, it's again 2 years. I mean, come on here. More than a decade after graduating, he still owes 20 grand. And again, this is the scam. See, he wants to become a freelance photographer, but yet somehow he's pushed. I'm assuming, maybe he wasn't, but he's pushed into thinking that it's a good idea to go to college. And then he's got this 20 grand in debt. I'm sure it was a lot higher than that uh, because the government subsidized all these loans and therefore the cost of education skyrockets. I mean, it's just such a joke. So, yet the repeated extensions are just a kind of spot treatment on a national crisis. Yeah, again, I agree. It's a crisis, but they're saying the crisis is just the fact that they have all this debt, and I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's really not getting to the core of the problem. So, a year into Joe Biden's presidency, Scott is disappointed the chief executive hasn't moved to forgive student debt. And here we go. And this is something that I agree with Scott. I mean, you got to listen, these politicians and these people that are in charge of our institutions, we can't just let them off the hook and say, "Oh, well, yeah, they lie." Well, they all lie. Who cares? I mean, they did the same thing with Trump. Oh, well, that's just Trump. They do the same thing with Elon Musk. Oh, that's just Elon being Elon. No, that's not Elon being Elon. That's dishonesty. That's lying. And we shouldn't allow any of our political leaders, I don't care if they're on the right or left, to get away with this garbage. And even if you allow them to get away with it, you shouldn't trust them moving forward. If someone is willing to lie to you and break their promise about canceling $10,000 per borrower, why wouldn't they be willing to lie to you about everything regarding the cerveza sickness? It's a simple question. And it's one that for some reason, a lot of the CNN viewers out there just never ever ask themselves. It says, I don't see student loan debt as something that there's a way out of or a way around. My sights are set on what our political leadership is going to do. Okay, but again, Scott, let's take some responsibility here, my friend. You see, and this is a problem that I have with not just this generation, but with our society as a whole today, is we want to just look to government to solve all of our problems as though it's almost like you're 33 years old, but you still want to be a 13-year-old, right? That you still want mommy and daddy to take care of you. You still, you're on your own, but you want the government, if you get into a problem, you don't want to have to solve it yourself because that's hard. You want the government, you want mommy and daddy to come in and solve the problem for you. And I think this is such a huge difference in the way that people were brought up maybe in the 90s and the 2000s compared to how I was brought up in the 1970s. And, I hate to say that and sound, I don't know if arrogant is the right word, but, well, my generation was better type thing. I'm not really saying that, but my generation was a heck of a lot different. And I'm not saying it's better. It was just way, way different. And and I think a lot of you on this live stream can probably relate. When I was growing up, it was all about you just wanted your freedom. You wanted to get out of the house. You wanted to get out of the control of your parents. It didn't matter if you were poor. It didn't matter if you couldn't eat. You just wanted your freedom. And there was a much higher priority placed on freedom and being an individual and getting out of the control of your parents. Today, the kids just want their parents forever. And if they have to leave their parents' house when they're 30, well, then they don't want more free. They want more parents. Well, if those parents are gone, I want government parents to take care of me. When back in my day, it was just the complete opposite. You didn't want anything from the government. You didn't want anything, even if it meant lowering your standard of living dramatically. All of my friends were fine, great. I want to venture out on my own. I want to conquer the world. And if that means me living in my car, so be it. At least I'm free. And this is just a completely different mindset today. And back then, another thing that is wildly different is for fun. I mean, not only did it revolve around freedom, but at least for guys, when I was a teenager and whatnot, it pretty much fun was danger. That's what if it wasn't dangerous, it wasn't fun. And I just see boy, I see the 13, 14, 15-year-old kids out there today just living in this bubble of safety. And again, not saying it's right or wrong, but boy, oh boy, is it different. And therefore, I think Gen Xers and people my age group, we just can't really understand this mindset of going to the government for all of your problem. Well, the government needs to take care of me, just like my parents did, because at the age of 13, we didn't want anything to do with our parents. We didn't want anything to do with the government. We didn't want help at all. And we just wanted to be left alone. And it's just different, isn't it? But let's keep going here. When the pandemic first hit the country in March 2020, the U.S. Department of Education announced it was offering the millions of Americans with student debt the ability to press the pause button on their loans without interest accruing. Research, this is staggering right here. Look at this. Research shows nearly all borrowers accepted. I didn't realize that either. We're talking about, we're going to get to the numbers below here. We're talking about 1.7 trillion in debt. I understand that it wasn't written off, but those payments just stopped. I mean, think about, is it any surprise that Shiba Inu has just gone ballistic, or NFTs? I mean, that you're 18, you're 20, you're 22 years old. You got an extra $500 in your pocket every single month. Why wouldn't you just throw it down YOLO? I mean, seems to me this is what's happening to a large degree, and this is what's propping up the riskiest of assets. I mean, a lot of these people in this demographic, they think that really crypto they can't lose. It's not a matter of how much money. It's not a matter of if you make money in crypto. It's just how much. Same thing with NFTs, and you've got to sympathize with them to a certain degree because they've never seen a bear market. They don't know what that looks like. They just think you always buy the dip. And the only thing they know of is Tesla and Uber. And they just see these companies that I know Tesla might be making money now, but they sure didn't for a long, long time. They just see all these companies that are totally unprofitable, but they just go to the moon. Their stock just goes up and up and up. Just tech, tech, tech. Oh, it's going to change the world. Oh, really? I'll buy the shares and I'll get rich. That's the only thing they have seen in their whole entire life. So why on earth would you not take your $500 a month and just hang out on the Reddit forums all day long and try to figure out what the next crypto is that's going to explode? I'm not saying all of them are doing it, but I've got to imagine a large percentage. And when you look at the fact that nearly all borrowers accepted, not a large percentage, nearly all of them, this really kind of puts all the pieces of the puzzle together here. That relief was supposed to last just 6 months, but nearly 2 years later, and after 5 additional extensions, 3 of which were under Biden, the pause is still in effect. Most recently, the White House announced it was pushing out the break until May of 2022. We know that millions of student loan borrowers are still coping with the impact. Oh, okay, here we go. Let's change the language, Biden. Let's make it more accurate. We know that millions of student loan borrowers are still coping with the impacts of the government's response to the cerveza sickness and need some more time before resuming payments. So this is where, okay, let's look at the labor market right now. We have the tightest labor market in human history. So really, I get it. The government destroyed the economy, and I'm the first person to say that. But how many of the Scotts out there? You're telling me that Scott, sure, he might not be able to get a gig where he's a photographer, but you're telling me he can't get a gig out there making 20 or 30 bucks an hour, at least making enough money to start paying back his student loan? I mean, come on, come on. If we had a labor market like we had during the GFC, which is what we should have had to wipe out all of the excess malinvestment and misallocation of resources that we had built up since then. But if we would have had that type of labor market, okay, I get it. Because those of you that were around back then, you remember what happened to the labor market in 2009, 2012. It was not the tightest labor market in human history. There was massive excess capacity. I remember when I first got involved in real estate, and this was 2012, as most of you know. And I remember I had to do a remodel. So I'm like, well, I'll just be my own GC, general contractor. And so I just put up a couple ads on Craigslist for just kind of handyman or, tile guys or something like that. And I remember, I think I offered like $15 an hour, $12 an hour, something like that. And I remember within like an hour, I had like literally hundreds of resumes. Hundreds of resumes. And then I remember going back in, let's see, I needed to do some updates to one of the properties, I think in 2017 or something like that, and ran the same Craigslist ad. I'd get maybe 1 or 2 resumes. And that was, I had to up it to probably $20 an hour, something like that. So you see my point is back in the GFC, when we actually had a proper recession, and not that it was to the extent it should have been, because we should have got more of the malinvestment out of the system, but the government came in and intervened and blew the bubble even larger. So now we've had to pay for it through an even larger we have to pay for it with even more economic distortions than we had before. And eventually, when they can't continue to blow more air into the bubble, or in doing so, they create inflation, you're going to have a much longer drop to get to the bottom. But my point is that, come on, Scott, you're in a super tight labor market. There's help wanted signs on every single door of pretty much every restaurant, every store. So it's not that you can't find work to uh, pay down your student debt. It's that you can't find work you like. And I'm not saying, I mean, you got scams, Scott. I get it. But let's put on our big boy pants here and let's just do what we need to do and grow up a little bit and make it happen. Prior to the public health crisis, outstanding student loan debt had surpassed 1.7 trillion, outpacing credit card and auto debt. Wow. Man, outpacing credit card and auto debt. The average monthly bill was around $400, and nearly 1 in 4 borrowers were either delinquent or in default. Boy, I didn't know that either. So let's think through what inflation does to people in this income group that cannot afford to pay $400 a month. And you guys know where I'm going with this. If we have inflation with groceries, rent, energy prices, that doesn't affect me too. It does affect me. I mean, you guys heard this story. My rent went up by 30% the other day. But that's something that I can absorb. It's my rent is a very small fraction of my overall income. If Scott's rent goes up by 30%, that's a deal breaker. I mean, he's done because that's such a huge portion, most likely, of his overall income. So what we're doing by creating inflation, and these politicians have the audacity to come out and say that inflation is just a high class problem. Give me a break. This shows that we're disproportionately affecting the poor and the middle class by trying to prop up this economy by blowing more and more air into these asset bubbles. So what you're doing is you're completely wiping out the middle class because you've got the people with the assets and they are getting richer and richer and richer and richer. At least they think they are. For the time being, they are, because their assets are going up maybe at a faster rate than inflation. So they're getting, they're buying all the fancy cars. They're the ones that are buying the McMansions and making my rent go up by 30% because of excess demand for these high-end condos and whatnot. But then you've got the people at the bottom that are really paying the price for subsidizing the people at the top. That's really what's happening here. And it's disgusting. And it's exactly what Milton Friedman taught us about inflation back in the 1970s, that it's just a stealth tax on the poor and the middle class. So then this person, not Scott, but columnist for the Washington Post, Katrina, says that Biden should act now. Canceling student debt is strategically smart as it is moral and urgent. Okay, so let's just think through first of all, what do you think the probabilities are that they do this? Because I think they're going to keep kicking the can down the road. I mean, if they haven't made them start paying it back yet, I mean, when will they? What would prompt them to start? And you think that with inflation going up and all of Biden's constituents being pissed off, I mean, you've seen his polling numbers. They're completely horrible. So he's not going to want to do anything to piss off his constituents. So they're just going to keep kicking that can down the road. And so I don't know when they have to start paying it back, but let's just say that they wipe it out altogether, which I think is highly probable going into the next election, especially if inflation is running hot, because they need some way to buy votes. And this would be a great way to do it. So if they're buying votes by wiping out the student loan debt, then what happens to Shibu Inu? What happens to the price of housing? I think it just, I don't know that it goes up dramatically, but there's going to be a lot of tailwind behind all of these things that young people are quote unquote investing in. And that's what I would look for as a astute investor right now. I would be trying to pay attention. I'd be setting up like a Google alert for student loan debt forgiveness, and I'd be paying attention to what the narrative is. And if this is picking up more and more and more steam, let's say we get the surveillance sickness behind us because of the new scariant wipes everything out. Just what if? Moving into 22, I think now issues like this take front and center. And that's when I would have to say, okay, if they wipe this out, that means that we're going to see significant amounts of price inflation in these certain areas. And also, I would say that we're going to see a bigger increase in the labor shortages for especially retail and for restaurants and bars and whatnot, because that's where a lot of these kids, unfortunately, are working. The kids that got scammed into believing that this English major would help them get a job paying $100,000 a year when they get out into reality, and they realize that, oh wait, I'm not going to get that $100,000 a year job. I can just get a job working waiting tables or tending bar. There's a lot of those out there, but where are those jobs at Google that I was promised when I went in and took on this $100,000 in debt to get my English degree? And so here's Biden saying, today I announced my administration is extending the pause on federal student loan repayments for another 90 days. So, I mean, can you imagine him coming out and saying, oh, sorry, guys, I'm not going to extend it? I think the probability of that is very low. Yeah, and here's what it says: critics of the student loan debt jubilee. This is where they say, well, they're usually higher earners, so we shouldn't be giving them a break. And I don't think I don't have any data to back that up, but I would say I don't think so. Maybe this was true back in the 80s and the 90s where there was kind of a causal effect there, but I don't think that's the case anymore. He says, in the meantime, many borrowers are likely getting impatient. Okay. This goes back to looking at government as mommy and daddy. And it's like, mommy, why haven't you paid off my loan yet? I'm getting mad at you. I mean, it's not the way I was raised. Just not the way I was raised. But what I want to point out here is this, in my opinion, is kind of a pervasive narrative within his constituents, Biden's. So, assuming that inflation is continuing to stay high, and as a result, he is very, very unpopular, he's going to need to figure out a way to buy votes. And if his constituents are getting impatient, well, this is kind of the path of least resistance, just like price controls. Yeah, disappointment in the lack of movement on broad student loan forgiveness may hurt Democrats' prospects for the midterm elections unless they act. Yeah, makes sense. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Always stand up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism. See you in the next video.